Hey everyone, I'm Lucy, joined by Tamoor Hussain.
Hi.
And Dave Klein.
Hey.
And recently Dave got to go hands-on, a little bit of an extra hands-on with Elden Ring, beyond where the closed network test ended, which is very exciting. So Tam and I are going to quiz him about all the new stuff he got to play and see how the game is shaping up ahead of the February 25th release date. So Tam, you and I both played the network test.
Yeah.
Pretty extensively. But Dave, what did you get to play that was different?
So, firstly, it's the same area as the network test at first. Limgrave's pretty much your starting area, but they did change things, which we can talk about a little bit. And then I got to play into Stormveil Castle, the area south of Limgrave, and then a little beyond Stormveil Castle. So I got to hit up Godrick, say hi to him, ask him why he was grafted, that sort of thing.
Perfect. I mean, like you kind of mentioned it there that things have changed, and I think that's the stuff that I kind of want to ask about before we get into the new stuff, because obviously the network test is so that From can get it in front of players, maybe tweak things. I think in particular people were talking about maybe spirit ashes, the kind of wolves, or the sort of the summons, I guess if you want to call them that, felt a little bit overpowered. I'm very intrigued to see what they would have changed. So what leapt out at you?
So I decided for my first 3 hours basically to just replay everything from the network test, because I knew I could do that fast just to level up and give myself a chance to play more in a way. So some of the bosses were slightly different. Like some of them actually had a larger move set than they did in the network set test, which was interesting, like the smaller dungeon bosses. Also, some of the bosses were different. Not many, but a couple where I was like, oh, I thought this boss would be there. It's a different boss. The drops were totally different, which is something that I think we were suspecting. Like there wasn't as much overpowered gear in the beginning, as an example. And then, honestly, Market was a little easier to me than he was in the network test, and the Spirit Ashes were nerfed, for sure. I didn't really use them that much in the network test because I wanted to see if I could beat the bosses solo. I used them a little bit more here. They did, like, no damage at all to the bosses. They really just helped distract them, really, more than anything. Although you can level them up, so that's something I never did. I never found the person to do that, but I did find materials to allow you to level them up. So that's a thing.
The boss stuff, are you allowed to talk about what the new bosses are, and were all the changes? Do you feel like they're changes because they're narratively more relevant to what the final game is going to be, or is it a case of they're experimenting with different bosses now just to see and tune and that kind of? Because sometimes they'll chuck in a boss that is clearly not meant to be there just to see mechanically if it's tuned properly, and other times it's like, all right, now we're going to put in the boss here because this is where the boss will be for the narrative and characterization.
The boss changes in terms of the locations weren't that different. They were just a little bit, and it didn't feel like a narrative thing to me. I'm guessing they were just playing around with it. Because I did find one of them in a different spot, and he wasn't any harder. It was just like, oh, okay, I know this one, and now he's here. Actually, one of the ones they replaced was way more difficult, where I was like, whoa, that's different. I think with Margit, it might be a case of just like leveling and all that, where I felt more prepared, weirdly, even though I don't know if I was as high of a level this time around. And it could also just be because now I know his moveset from having played the network test. But he definitely didn't pose as nearly as much of a challenge as the network test, where I was relieved to have beaten him in the network test. That's not to say the bosses are any easier, for people wondering. Like there was a boss early on that I fought that had a much more expanded moveset, where I was like, this boss is challenging now. They were really easy before. So yeah, it feels very standard Souls to me in terms of difficulty. Like nothing stood out to me as like extremely difficult, like more so than normal. Nothing stood out to me as way too easy.
And architecturally, like was the early area Limgrave still mostly the same? Like no new mini dungeons or anything like that popping up, or any more like unexpected new enemies that we haven't seen before?
As far as I could tell, Limgrave was the exact same, other than there are no walls blocking you from going where you want to go, which was nice.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, like, maybe I didn't explore deep enough, because for me, Limgrave is like, I know this, I'm going to do everything as fast as I can just so I can move on to new stuff. So I wasn't really looking into the nitty-gritty details, but everything seemed relatively the same. I'll say the dragon statue on the island that you could find in the network test, that was a little more expanded. I don't want to ruin too much. It's not like there's not that much more. There's just slightly more you can get there than in the network test. In the network test, if you got the dragon heart for being the dragon, you can take it to that island and get something for it. It's still similar. It just has a little more usage, but that's about it. That's the only thing I noticed. I just don't want to spoil too much.
Sure.
I want to reveal things, but without being too spoilery. You know.
That's fair. I mean, honestly, I'm glad you. I'm glad that you're kind of doing it that way. I know a lot of people watching will be glad as well, because it's one of those games where a lot of the joy of From games is the discovery along the way.
Yeah.
It's also really cool to hear that, like, I don't know how you guys are feeling, but, you know, when you've played a little section of a game before, when it comes to final release, it's like, I don't want to have to play all that again, but the fact that stuff has moved and changed is exciting to me, and I think, as well, you kind of approach it with the confidence of, I've played some of this before, like, I know basically how characters move, how it all works, and now I can just approach it my own way. So Dave, when you did this latest playthrough, which class did you pick? Did you do anything differently?
Okay, I'm gonna look up the name of the class real quick, because I chose a class that wasn't in the network test. So I chose the Vagabond. That's a new class. So the classes, by the way, and I think I can say this, that you could choose, at least for me, were Vagabond, Warrior, Hero, Bandit, Astrologer, Prophet, Samurai, Prisoner, Confessor, and Wretch. Wretch is the level 1 character, so they do have one of those back, which is nice. But Vagabond's kind of like...
all of them now, I think.
At least as far as we know.
Yeah.
Vagabond was basically your knight class, and I typically bounce between a dex build and a strength build for what I like to play, and Vagabond was a bit more of a strength type of build, so that's what I ended up choosing for this test. Whereas, actually, when I did the network test, I did the dex build, so I kind of changed it up a little bit.
What was that class like then, in terms of special or unique abilities and general performance? Because I went with the Bloody Wolf originally. And it felt, and that's a dex build as well, and that felt pretty good. But I generally gravitate towards the knight type as well, and use strength.
Yeah, you'd probably like Vagabond then.
Yeah.
I mean, like, honestly, it starts with the longsword. It didn't start with a heavy weapon, which I think the Lone Wolf does.
Yeah.
It started with just a normal longsword, but it was pretty easy to level into that strength build. I think it starts with a little more dexterity than the Lone Wolf, so maybe the Lone Wolf is more of a pure strength build, but I like having a bit of quality, I guess. And I just wanted to try something new. But, I mean, pretty early on, I found a heavy weapon that I decided to switch to because it did a good job stunning enemies, and I was like, this is nice. I'm switching to this. So I started using that instead and going pretty full-on strength build.
Okay.
Well, you mentioned new stuff there. Let's get into the new stuff that you got to play. So you went all the way up to Stormveil, Godrick.
Yeah.
How did that go? And then where did you go after that?
Yeah, so this is something that I was thinking about as a good analogy for people who haven't played as far as Stormveil goes. In a way, if people are wondering how the open world works for Elden Ring, it's like, imagine playing Demon Souls, but instead of having your hub and then you warp into Boletaria, you warp into Latria, it's almost like, hey, I'm going to roam into a world and I happen upon Boletaria. I happen upon Latria, whatever area. Although I guess, honestly, the size-wise, it's a little more comparable to, as far as Stormveil goes, it's a little more comparable to, like, Cathedral of the Deep from Dark Souls 3, or maybe Irithyll.
Okay.
Like, maybe about that size, if slightly bigger than that. So maybe Irithyll, like a slightly larger type of major area like that. And it feels very, very classic Souls in the sense of, and Bloodborne, in the sense of, like, you can't use your horse there, or your steed. It's very, like, interwoven dungeons. Like, there are a couple major paths and multiple paths where I found, like, oh, this is where they weave back into each other. This is ways that they connect or don't connect and where you can go around. It was a very fun, classic FromSoftware experience going into that. I definitely didn't finish exploring Stormveil. I started to run out of time and was like, okay, I need to just find Godrick and try to beat him. So I kind of just bum rushed it to the end after the later mark of my time in Stormveil, but there's a lot there. It was a nice classic From experience, and definitely outside of whatever you feel about the open world. Once you get into that, you'll be like, this is it. I'm back into a classic From experience.
Did it have mini bosses in Stormveil as well, or is it just like you explore up until you reach the main boss and then you're done?
So if you recall the many-armed key bearer or whatever from the network test, as everyone was calling it, I think they're called Scions for real, or something similar to that. There was one of those that I found that I think was actually in one of the trailers, but I was kind of underleveled when I first got to Stormveil, and when I started attacking it, I didn't have to fight it, I just chose to, and I realized I was doing like nicks of damage to it, and it would kill me in like 2 hits. So I never came back to try to kill it, but it was just kind of in the middle of the dungeon. Otherwise, I didn't find any mini bosses, but there might be some other ones that I just didn't happen upon. I found two NPCs, the one that you find in the network test that's like handling the gate, and then the one that was in the trailer. So I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything saying that.
Yeah. Any kind of indication? I assume it's going to be the same, but like quest progression, did you get any kind of like experience with that? Did multiple characters, or did one character pop up in multiple places? Because the original FromSoftware approach is you talk to a character, over time that character moves, and then there's different circumstances, and that's how you progress their quest. Do you feel like it's the same? Because obviously that's a contentious way to do arc progression.
Yeah. So as far as the main quest goes, Melina changes and says some different things. There's some progression there, but that's like main story. There were some side quests that I found, but I know there's quest progression for sure because I either messed up or something bad definitely happens in some instances. I don't know which, and I just don't want to spoiler what it was specifically,
right.
But there is some of that quest progression with NPCs for sure.
Okay.
And I don't know how many branches there are. I either messed up or there was one branch. I don't know. But yeah, there's some quest progression, definitely.
I think for me it's interesting that they're sticking to their guns and still having that kind of quest progression in their style, because obviously that's something that even people who play from software games start to finish will often not interact with the quest progression part of it, which is good on them for sticking to their guns.
Yeah. I actually like it, so I'm glad that they're doing that.
Yeah.
Although it's hard for finding lore, because then it's like, oh god, did I miss something that I... But something else interesting, too, that I found while playing this was that when we played the network test, all the dungeons were pretty small. They felt almost like challenge dungeons from Bloodborne, outside of the main legacy dungeon that we really didn't get to play. I did happen upon a dungeon that Game Informer talked about in their article that is much bigger. That's not a legacy dungeon. That's I'd say like a more medium-sized dungeon that feels like a very classic FromSoftware dungeon experience that didn't feel as much like a challenge dungeon. And I wasn't expecting it to. I was like, I'll just like knock this out really quick, because I was just trying to kind of like level up a bit and find some things before I returned to Stormveil to tackle it a second time. And it just kept on going. I was like, oh, this is actually big. It kind of surprised me, but in a good way. So that's definitely worth noting, because I think I could see, at least myself, I was a little disappointed by some of the dungeons in that they all felt so small. And then finding that like, oh, wow, okay, there really is a range here where there's going to be very mini dungeons, medium-sized ones. This one was a little bit bigger. That was interesting.
Do you think that kind of helps with the co-op part of it? Because this is a game that I feel like more people are going to play in co-op than any previous game. Do you think that do you see yourself doing more of that kind of open world stuff in co-op? Or do you feel like you're going to solitary play it again?
This is hard for me to say because I like tackling these games solo. I never play them co-op unless I'm doing like stuff with friends for videos. I'm definitely tackling it solo. That's just how I like playing these games.
Yeah. I from the stuff that I played in network test, I think I'm the same where I'd play solo, but I think I'm more inclined to jump into people's games now and do some of the, not invasion, but like, the co-op stuff. And if there's people that, I feel like this is the game where if you have always had an interest in Souls games, but always never quite clicked with you, this is the game where you could probably grab a couple friends and explore the open world together and I think of it as like Breath of the Wild, but co-op in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that could be interesting. And because of that, I think I like the idea of having bigger dungeons that aren't main dungeons, because it would wear thin if you were doing the stuff co-op and every dungeon took like 5 minutes to do.
Yeah.
I think you need to have bigger spaces.
It was a concern I had before going into this, honestly, for myself. And then it was kind of a welcome relief when I found that, where I was like, okay, this is nice that there are some different sizes. There are definitely some cool mysteries I found too, which is awesome, where I'm like, I don't know how to do this. This is really cool. I want to find out. Like that trailer where there's the thing walking that had the bell underneath and the church on top.
Yeah.
I found it.
Oh,
I don't know what to do. I'm just like, oh, this is great. I found it. What the hell do I do?
Yeah.
It's fun to have those mysteries lingering over. So it's cool that there's a lot of that too. There's a lot of intrigue and mystery still.
Yeah. Was that in the network test? I remember.
Nah, it was in a different area. So
Okay, cool.
so I happened upon it this time playing. And,
Gotcha.
And
yeah, it's just like, oh, sick.
It's like, there it is. Anything else you can tell us about the new areas you got to see?
Yeah, okay, so Godrick, I did fight him, and I think it took me about 5 attempts to beat him. So I had the lowest level Spirit Ash, and I decided to use it for one of mine just to help distract him, and it did a good job. And then I didn't find him any more difficult than a standard Souls boss, personally. But it's not like he was easy. It's just that, he feels like a pretty standard Souls boss to me in a lot of ways, and then he has a second form. Which I don't want to spoil too much about, even though I think everyone kind of knows from the trailer what it's going to be like. But
Is there anything you can say about like the general approach to fighting him? Because like you look at him, and obviously most Souls players are going to be like, try and circle strafe, get behind him, and that kind of stuff. But then that is the general approach for most enemies or bosses that look the way Godrick does. But then FromSoftware has had an awareness of that stuff, like. And easy ones like Dark Souls 2, Flexile Sentry is like they designed that boss very much to stop people from doing that.
Yeah.
Did you get a sense of their awareness for like kind of subverting expectation or even forcing people into doing other things that they would traditionally not?
So for Godrick specifically, I guess I found that I kind of figured out his moveset early on, and it was kind of like, okay, this is the move where I need to get away and dodge a bunch of times, and then he's going to either run in at me or stay away.
Okay.
And then it felt very classic. I didn't feel like it subverted my expectations too much. There was a boss early on that I found. Elden Ring has something very similar to the keystones from Dark Souls 2, where Ferris's keys. Where basically like you have special unlockable areas with keys that are limited that you run out of. The Legacy dungeons had areas like this. I actually found a Gowl, the one, if you remember that area for the network test. I found one of those that was locked away by one of those things. And there's another one early on that I found where there was a boss at the bottom that was very Bloodborne-esque in a lot of ways, where it was like, this is weird. I had to go back like 5 times after leveling up a bunch and leveling up my weapons to try to tackle him again because I really wanted to beat him. And when I finally did, I still wasn't sure that I knew his moveset, really. I was like, I feel like I just lucked out of beating this guy. He was so weird the way he moved, and I was like, I think I kind of get it, and then he'd do something that's like, I don't get it, I don't know. So there is some of that. It's just Godrick specifically didn't throw me off too much, but there was good. Some of that.
That's good. Yeah, my concern is, the reason I love Sekiro is because almost none of the classic Souls approaches work on any of it, and my concern was like, oh, we're gonna get in the ass and clap them cheeks boss, and then we're gonna get the run away for a minute and then run in, do a strike or run away. So it sounds like they're mixing things up a bit, which is good.
Yeah, I think Godrick might hit your concerns a little bit, at least for me, and I'd assume for you it'll feel very classic. Honestly, I think Margit gave me a bigger challenge than Godrick. My first time fighting Margit.
Yeah, Margit was aggressive. So
yeah, because Margit was so aggressive, and even when you try to stay away, he'd still like sometimes do something like, screw you, Margit. But yeah, Godrick wasn't so bad for me, but yeah, I like there are some bosses I found that were like, this is more Bloodborne-y and more weird. And if you play Bloodborne, you're kind of familiar in a way, but it's still like, you know, those ones get weird sometimes. You're like, okay, this is different. This is weird. I don't know what limb it has and what it's going to use with that limb. There were some really cool enemies I found too. So I was able to play a little bit past Godrick as well, and I found there are multiple type of Erdtrees, by the way. I don't want to spoil what's in any of them, but there's different sizes, and each size has a different type of treat with it, or enemy associated with it. Something I can also say, I think, is that Godrick, for beating him, you do get the boss soul sort of thing, where you can get weapons cool. If you find the right character, with the juicy lore descriptions on those as well.
Nice.
And I did find... Well, this is in the trailer. I did find a great rune. I don't want to say where or how I found it, but I did manage to find a great rune. Those also have interesting status effects, and you can actually use those on your character. For the most part, the area past Godrick, I defeated him. I played for 7 hours about. I defeated him with 30 minutes left to spare. So at that point, I was kind of just like in panic mode of like, I need to see everything I can. So I was just like, got on my horse and just started like running through everything just to be like, let me see as many sights and sounds as I can see beyond him. The area afterward does change up. It doesn't look like Limgrave. So if anyone's concerned about everything looking like Limgrave, it doesn't, which is nice. There were definitely... it was like more of a swampy marsh sort of area in a way, but
yes, we're back at the swamps.
I was gonna say
it wasn't
loves
poisonous
swamp.
though. Yet. I know there are poisonous swamps. This one wasn't yet, but it was cool. It was a cool area. It was different. I didn't get a chance to explore it too much, but and I could tell there like again, there's like a lot of things where I was like, there's probably this cool dungeon there. There's probably a cool secret there that I wasn't really able to explore into. The area south of Limgrave that you can... I think, honestly, before you go to Stormveil, you're supposed to go to the area south of Limgrave. I think that's logically what you're supposed to do. That I explored a little more, and there were a bunch of churches with important things. Basically, there's ways that you can upgrade your Estus flasks, and you probably want to do that before you go into Stormveil.
Interesting. All right, so after all this time with the game, both network test and this new hands-on, we're a couple weeks out. Is there anything about Elden Ring that kind of has you worried as a long-term FromSoft fan? Because it is a very big departure from...
My personal concern, and this is just for me, is that the open world will detract a bit from how much I love their typical interconnected style worlds, where like Bloodborne, I just love when you like wrap around Yharnam and you're like, oh my god, this connects all the way back here, and how cool is that? And while the legacy dungeons do have that within it, it was nice for me with Bloodborne that the entire world felt that way, or Dark Souls 1, the entire world felt that way. So I'm a little worried about that for myself, but it's definitely nice. I always like when FromSoftware tries something different, and it's nice to see them trying something different. And like one of my biggest concerns was the smaller dungeons, and finding this like larger, just regular dungeon was like, okay, they kind of, my concern has been addressed in that regard. But I think that's it, and it's just very personal to me. I know some people are going to be like, great, I love that they're just doing it open. The fact that you can just skip Stormveil and go to a different area because it's too hard, or you just want to explore something else. I'm sure some people will absolutely love that aspect.
Perfect. Well, Dave, thank you so much. Elden Ring is coming out February 25th. It's not long to wait at all. We are going to have so much coverage up on GameSpot, so make sure you like this video and subscribe. Tam, where can people find you?
You find me on Twitter at TamoorH.
Dave?
The Dave Klein.
Go to DaveControl live on YouTube as well, because Dave's got a lot of good soul stuff there.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm on Twitter at LucyJamesGames, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks.